and hopefully we get people joining us. Bop, bop, bop. It was good to start rereading it. I couldn't finish a full-on reread, but
I couldn't. It's too long.
yeah, but I got a decent chunk of it in. Man, this is good. Man, this is a really good story. We have Tehillim29 saying, "Good to see you all. Good to see you too, buddy. Thank you for popping in."
See it, Tim. Tehillim.
Yeah. Oh, I figured this way I at least get a show in this week. I knew like on a Saturday nobody was probably gonna pop in, but fuck it. Who cares? I will intro us in, and I think we can get cooking with some gas. Before that, Smoky Dude says, "My boys, how are y'all? I'm doing okay, man. A little bit sickly, but I will survive."
Yes.
What about you, Boom?
Well, well, I hope I do hope you're feeling better, Dark Knight. I mean, I know that you're dealing with I'm drinking Corona, and you're suffering through it, actually. So I hope you're feeling better. I'm obviously doing better than you are, and hopefully we'll we're talking about something hopeful tonight. We're talking about these Darwyn Cooke's The New Frontier. Hopefully it'll put a little bit of cheer in your heart, even if your current circumstances merit against it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's get hopeful. And on that, we'll get right into the show. Hey guys, welcome to the 63rd episode of Let's Talk Comics, where myself and another co-host in the comics community discuss one of the many facets of the storytelling medium that is comics. Whether it be stories, creators, constructs, or adaptations, we hit it all this week. Of course, I am joined by my partner in crime, the comic book cake crusader himself, with a glass of Crown in his hand, my pal Comic Boom. Man, it's despite the circumstances of my health, it is good to be here with you.
Good to be here too. It's always good, and it's even better. Number one, talking with you on all things comics, and number two, talking about my favorite artist of all time, Darwyn Cooke, and he's written one of my favorite stories of all time that ranks right up there, easily in the top three. Always potentially number one, and that's New Frontier. So looking forward to discussing it.
Yeah, DC The New Frontier, I think, is this beautiful merger between the high-flying colors and the wonder of comic book superheroism, but also it deals with some very real topics and some very real themes. I think from the outside looking in, I don't think you would quite expect, based on the style of Darwyn Cooke's work, or visually on the style of Darwyn Cooke's work, that this would be such a political tale with hard-hitting themes about humanitarianism and like the moral ambiguity of what is truly right and what is truly wrong, especially in war. And it's super powerful. So, we figured that with everything going on in the world, obviously America is hopefully on the decline of a very tumultuous time for the public. We figured, let's talk about something inspirational, especially seeing how both of us have been quite disenfranchised with DC Comics. So, we figured we'd have the show as an open letter to the publisher themselves to remind them how to write their own superheroes and why they mean such great deals to millions upon millions of people. So going into this, I feel like I couldn't do this justice like you could, Boom. If you had to kind of very briefly describe to the layman who might not have read DC The New Frontier or watched the film, what is happening in this story?
DC's The New Frontier is the story of DC superheroes, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman, the heroes of the Golden Age, coming upon the scene in a world coming out of the Great Depression and evolving into through World War II into the late 1950s and early 1960s, and sort of evolving into the Silver Age. And they meet up with all the other iconic DC heroes of the Silver Age: the Flash, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, Challengers of the Unknown, it's a really eclectic mix of all those fantastic heroes, but not only that, also the women too, and it combines that with with fantastic themes that Darwyn Cooke borrowed from our own history, which makes it even more rich and vibrant and feels very real, because we all know what, I mean, it's very recent history for us, even though we weren't around then. It's recent history in terms of, World War I, World War II, coming out of that, the 50s, the 60s, how the 20th century, how it changed humanity. And let's face it, even without superheroes, it was a tumultuous time, but a vibrant time, more growth and more growth in society. We became, the baby boomers. We became really the richest country, a first world country. We really came into our own, both in America and all Canada as well. And it was just a really great time. We're so lucky. Every generation became more materialistic and luckier than the previous one, at least until recently, which is why we're reviewing this. And it's just a really great story. And the way that it combines the origins of the superheroes with real world history, how Hitler uses the spear of destiny to keep the superheroes, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, out of the war. Meanwhile, Justice Society comes into play, but then McCarthyism is introduced, but he doesn't just combat communism, Joe McCarthy, but he shuns superheroes, so they're shunned, and so they're sort of put to the wayside, and the government's against vigilantes for a while in the late 40s, early 1950s, and Our Man's attacked, and Batman and Superman stage a fight between themselves and sort of essentially go underground. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman gets involved, and she becomes part of the Vietnam conflict, and she interacts with Superman, and she has her own way of doing things that introduces her own politics, Amazonian politics, into the Vietnam theater, telling Superman the famous words, "There's the door, spaceman. I'm doing it my way." And it's just really, really well done, Darwyn's knowledge of the time period and how he weaves it into the origins of DC heroes.
Yeah, and there's definitely something to be said about how well he knows the time period. I mean, I am often one that'll get thrown off by very comic booky dialogue. But what I love about what Darwyn Cooke does here is that he really sets the dialogue and the sort of cadence and the language of the characters in the times that he's looking to represent. And I think that just as much as it's important to evoke the time period through many other things, the subtle use of dialogue and language, I think, is just a brilliant compliment to what Darwyn Cooke is doing here in setting the stage. Now, what I really, really like about The New Frontier is that obviously it does highlight the big three, DC's Trinity, but it's seen through the eyes of DC's more peripheral characters. And that's what I find most interesting, especially seeing how this is a reflection of, basically how America views itself, how it views the world, and how it views, ethics and morality. And I love that it's, this new up and coming of sorts generation that is on the side of the people who are getting the sort of FaceTime and the influence. We're seeing this in a way where, we can inspect the old guard and see how things will change throughout the course of the story. And what I find really interesting is that, for the first entire chapter of the series, you don't really play with any of those, iconic heroes. I mean, we go to Dinosaur Island with the losers to save Colonel Rick Flag. And it's this story about what it means to be an American and how Americanism should not overwhelm your own sense of identity, that Americanism should coincide with your identity that might not be traditional, to those ideals. And I really, really love what happens in that story, albeit brief. It's super effective. And it just hits hard. And I think that categorizing this book as something that just hits hard is the best way to describe it,
Yeah. Yeah, just to build on what you're saying, the themes here are incredible. There was the losers theme, that group of four World War II guess, veterans that end up on Dinosaur Island and dying on Dinosaur Island in their bid to ultimately rescue Rick Flag. And ultimately they're successful in doing so, but end up sacrificing themselves in the process. There's the character arcs. There are so many character arcs. When you think that this was just a 6-issue series, and when you count the number of genuinely well-developed character arcs in this story, it's incredible. All 4 of the losers, we learned something about all 4 of them. Hal Jordan's journey as a young soldier who is distraught because he ends up having to defend himself, and he kills a Korean soldier even though he doesn't want to, but he's riddled with guilt, and that guilt drives him throughout the entire narrative, even to the end when he's required to utilize the ring and use his will to overcome his guilt, to maximize his willpower. Martian Manhunter, stranded essentially on from Mars, finding a life here on Earth and finding his place amongst the other heroes. Wildcat, defeating Cassius Clay, the future Muhammad Ali, for the boxing championship. I mean, it's Iris and Barry Allen, and the Barry Allen falling in love with Iris and learning his powers and battling Captain Cold. There's just so many little moments here. Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane rescuing Hal Jordan, Lois Lane and Superman, Wonder Woman's character arc. I mean, it's incredible. And then in the ending, the very last page as it ends is that iconic image of the Justice League fighting Starro on the cover image of, I can't remember the
Brave and the Bold.
Thank you. Brave and the Bold, whatever issue that was. I can't remember, but that to end right when the Silver Age is maximized, just the Easter eggs that Darwyn Cooke put in this comic. It's just, if this is a great comic if you've never read comics, but it's an absolute gem if you know anything about DC history.
Absolutely. And even outside of DC, I mean, this book in many ways, I mean, Darwyn Cooke has even admitted it, but this book is also influenced by Watchmen, which is not something anybody would ever expect. And in a big bad way, it covers a lot of very similar themes, but it does it in a mirror, right? Like, and it's funny. It's ironic now, of course, now that it's like post-mortem and we've had our Watchmen debate. I could have used this against you, but it's that, this is not necessarily the antithesis to Watchmen, but it resolves the same themes, like I said, under a mirror. So where Watchmen is by far the more sort of depressing, blunt realization of human morality and human intent and things of that nature, this kind of flips that on its head. And although it explores some of that in very similar ways with sexism, racism, brutality, wartime ethics, things like that, it does so with a much more hopeful light. And before I move forward real quick, I did want to just address a comment that we got from Aaron Vio. He was generous enough to contribute to the channel. He's just saying, yo, sorry, I can't be there tonight. Have a great stream, gentlemen. Don't have too much fun without me. Well, I can't promise that, but I will say, man, I look forward to you being able to come back and watch this conversation. And I thank you so much for taking the time, albeit brief, to come and hang out with us for a minute. So thank you, man. I appreciate it. But on that, I wonder specifically for you, Boom, just as somebody who's probably read this more times than I have fingers, what was your favorite POV? Like, who was your favorite character to experience this story with?
Boy, that's a tough one, because it's literally switched. It's gone back and forth. It really does. It's gone back and forth because I mentioned before, and so did you, about the different character arcs. And it really, the wonderful thing about the story is that I go through different moods when I'm reading comics at different parts of the times of the year. Right now, I'm a little depressed with the state of DC. So if I'm one thing that stood out when I'm looking this was, the Hooded Justice, John Henry Irons, That's how Darwyn Cooke used him. And, you see Ku Klux Klan, and you see the fate, he ends up being killed and sacrificing himself in this very hopeful tale. And you can have such a depressing thing like racism, but addressed in a way that it ends with a sacrifice and with a hope for a better tomorrow. And I think, so that's one of the things that stands out right now. So the beautiful thing about this story is that I don't have a favorite part of this story. Although I will say the one that the favorite quote is Wonder Woman. I love Wonder Woman. And I would love to have a 6-issue series just dedicated to the New Frontier version of Wonder Woman. I just, just her Amazonian approach to, with the women in Vietnam, who she took the weapons away from the men and gave the weapons to the women and let the women kill all the men, as a way of uplifting him, because that's the Amazonian way. I love the hard ass Amazonian take no prisoner sort of approach that Wonder Woman had. That's one consistent thing that I've always loved. But frankly, that's just one small thing that I always sort of harp on when I'm complaining about Wonder Woman. I like a more aggressive Wonder Woman. That's why I like Darwyn Cooke's Wonder Woman. And Darwyn Cooke loves that scene. At the end of the Absolute Edition here, he mentions that scene. He quite enjoyed writing it. But, there's something in New Frontier for everybody. And literally, you will get something different out of it depending on what mood you're in when you're reading it.
You're 100% right. And this book is just in one term, it's so multifaceted. It really approaches all of these different concepts from multiple different angles. And what I love about it is the way that a lot of these sort of micro narratives evolve by, come the end of the story, and how Darwyn Cooke is always able to weave in, such complexity to those narratives, and those narratives themselves into something that is larger, something that culminates in something greater. Although all of these perspectives are very different, and there's a value in that and how different they are, there is a unifying force throughout this book, right? And it is hope. It is inherent goodness in people, to want to do the right thing for no other reason than wanting to do the right thing, and I mean, there's so many ways that this story shines and how it explores all of these different things. I, for one, am a big fan of Martian Manhunter's POV. I love it. And there's something about that scene where you watch Jean as he's trying to learn about Americans and humans by watching the TV. And it's like with every show he watches, he shapeshifts into a new character that he saw from the last program. And it seems like such a fun little throwaway moment, but it's also just indicative to the influences that television and media have on people. Like, Martian Manhunter in that moment was a sort of metaphorical stand-in for a child, right? This is how children are influenced. Yeah. What they see is what they become. So, I really thought that it was a brilliant, I mean, let me stop right there and sort of rephrase myself. Darwyn Cooke brilliantly is able to weave in things that you think are small and throwaway, but they mean something, and they assist to the overall narrative of this story in so many ways. Now, I think obviously kind of edging out the thumbnail and this being a sort of open letter to DC Comics. What particularly about DC the New Frontier do you think that a modern day DC Comics could learn from? What should they take away from perhaps looking at DC the New Frontier and bringing elements of that back into how we're going to reinterpret these characters for the modern age?
I would say that the answer is that good stories are timeless, and that legacy is important. And boy, does the New Frontier deal with legacy. It talks about the transition from the Golden Age to the Silver Age to a new frontier. It manages to encompass all those time periods. And literally, you could literally have a series of Black Label stories told in any of the time periods, Golden Age, Silver Age, and the New Frontier Age, as encapsulated in a Darwyn Cooke universe. Why this guy doesn't get his own Earth in the multiverse or omniverse, call it what you want, I don't care. is just, I think is a tragedy. But to more specifically answer your question, even if it's not going to be set in a New Frontier, Darwyn Cooke sort of universe, the fact that the passion and the love and the craftsmanship that Darwyn Cooke put into just creating the world, just create the structure, create the world that Darwyn Cooke did, and honor it. Don't deviate from it and change it all the time. You don't need to change it when something isn't broken. And I would just remind DC that you don't need to have different writers and give them creative freedom to do whatever they want, to change the setting, to change the environment, to change everything and start from scratch, because, true character development and building up a loyal fan base, they will come if the story is there and the foundation is there. And Darwyn Cooke has such a fantastic foundation. He took a history that we all know, and he took characters that we love, and he weaved them together. And the stories that could still be told here, I think, are timeless. And I just want to show up one of my favorite images in it is right from the Right Stuff. He was also inspired by the movie The Right Stuff, where with the astronauts walking down the pad. I mean, and this with all the heroes as they're about to embark on their final attack against against that entity that was destroying the Earth. I mean, it's just beautiful stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to make you the big screen, but
oh, sorry.
Wait. There we go. So you can show that bad baby off.
Yeah. No, it's a great image.
It is. It is gorgeous. It really is. There's also something about that it is such a presence, that he carries throughout this story through, the invocation of style. The way he stylizes things are so effective, and it's not the most hyper detailed artwork, but he has such a grasp on what he's doing with the camera. I mean, and what's happening with these characters and how they are acting, moving, emoting. The entire first story with the losers is all done in 3-panel grid widescreen for the most part, with occasional deviations. And he really knows how to bring you into the story, because right there he uses, these very all-encompassing cinematic techniques to bring you into a story that maybe you might not have been drawn into otherwise, right? Because it's the losers. They're not an iconic team to the same degree that many of the other characters or the Justice League, for that matter, are. So he uses these very, very smart creative choices in the art so that we don't care if we're watching Flash, Superman, Batman, whatever. He's bringing us in cinematically using his artwork. And aside from the fact that once he's grabbed you that way, the writing is so strong that you don't care who you're reading about. All you care about is what you're reading.
No. And every character has a moment. Mm-hmm. Every character has a moment. I mean, the storytelling lessons here that writers should be taking notes. I mean, he's dealing with such a large cast. Every character has a moment. Green Lantern, Superman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, the losers, Hooded Justice, Frank Carradine, Slam Bradley, good Lord, Iris Allen, Wildcat. I mean, the list goes on. And then ordinary people to have women in Vietnam have their moment. They're elements of heroism in the midst of darkness. And what's crazy here is that the enemy that they're fighting is kind of like this just giant entity, and the plan they have to defeat it is so insanely nuts. But it's explained, and infinite, perfect things have to happen perfectly for them to be victorious. And they just barely win. And even at the end, when you think Superman's dead, and then all of a sudden Aquaman shows up. Aquaman wasn't anyone, Aquaman was behind the scenes all this time, and he ends up rescuing Superman. And then Jimmy Olsen captures the image of Aquaman rescuing Superman, and Lois Lane, the great big beautiful eyes, because nobody draws women better than Darwyn Cooke. And I talk as if the guy's still alive. Tragically, I mean, he passed. He left us far too soon, man. But man, just like I could just I just love this series so much, and it's to my eternal detriment that I missed him when he was in Calgary. I never did get a original print by Darwyn Cooke, but I do have from Darwyn Cooke. I've shown this before, but I did get a signed 9.8 Catwoman #1 with Darwyn Cooke.
That's super cool.
Yeah, so I'm glad I got this. That's my prized possession from Darwyn Cooke. But
that's awesome. I will say, though, if you want something that strays to the side of Darwyn Cooke, there's a brilliant artist who I think pretty much only does covers. His name is Michael Cho, and he was actually friends with Darwyn Cooke. They were neighbors, which is really interesting. I sat down and talked to him for a little bit about a year and a half ago at a convention, and he was talking about, like, you know, just how good of a person Darwyn was and how conscious Darwyn was. And then, you know, obviously going into his art, how he uses such rich colors with such dark saturated blacks to create, like, you know, just these really impactful images. I actually have this great Michael Cho Daredevil print that is very Darwyn Cooke. I mean, you look at this and you can very much tell that, you know, him and Darwyn artistically work from, you know,
similar styles.
Yeah. And that's pretty much why I got this. And it's probably why I admire Michael Cho's art so much, is just because you get such a similar feeling when you look at their work, and it's so evocative. But I think it's good to get into a couple of these live chats for a minute before we go back to prattling, because you guys are certainly very passionate about the story as well. Ant Duhar says it's a classic. I wish that DC really understood that by seeing what New Frontier did and focused on would make modern DC better, tell a good story, and seeing the legacy of characters thrive. Yeah, I don't think either one of us are going to disagree with you, brother. There's a lot about this story that I think modern DC and AT&T could take note of, and that's pretty much like the intent of the thumbnail. Although, you know, they probably won't, but, you know, here's saying that, you know, AT&T and DC really need to understand what makes those characters important and what makes them valuable, you know, in the hearts and minds of the fans, the readers, even people that don't read comic books. I mean, these characters have extended past comic books in their iconography. I mean, as a child, you know, if you asked, you know, 10 children in a daycare what they want to be when they grow up, you're getting Supermans, Batmans, Spider-Mans. They're superheroes, you know. And although Spider-Man is a Marvel exception, point being is that these characters have extended, you know, to such heights in their iconography that their influence is so powerful. And I think DC is failing to remember what these characters mean and why those meanings are so important.
Yeah. My hope, the saving grace is, it is possible, you know, if we're going to be hopeful, let's be hopeful. If DC is going to sort of throw continuity to the wind, it's possible that we could fluke off another great New Frontier. It's possible, like, if we got a new writer that was as passionate about Darwyn Cooke to come along, and he or she was given carte blanche to do what he or she wanted, it's possible maybe that there's a future Darwyn Cooke like story or New Frontier like story out there that blossom in a continuity free, you know, continuity free zone. It's possible. I just think that, you know, I worry that maybe it's a little unlikely, but hey, I'm all for it. To me, you want to make sure that whatever, I just feel that right now DC doesn't really have the direction right now, and we're gonna see what happens after Future State, after Endless Winter, with maybe with Mark Waid on Superman. I know I'm crazy about Mark Waid, and I hope he doesn't disappoint like Bendis did, but I think maybe Mark Waid, if he sets the right tone on a revitalized Superman and maybe a revitalized DC universe, because Superman always sets the tone, I think, you know. Now, you know, if Superman can get off on the right foot, and, you know, and Mark Waid is he loves a lot of those classic Superman tales and those, and you know, fingers crossed, man, fingers crossed. We might be heading for a new frontier in more ways than one.
One could only hope. I mean, it's so rare to see anybody get close to this, but I mean, even if somebody were to create a story with the level of craftsmanship and love for these characters and their legacies as Darwyn Cooke did, even a fraction of it, in fact, I think we'd be in a pretty good direction. I mean, there's a reason that I mean, I don't know anybody that really knows comics that like doesn't put New Frontier in their top 10. You know what I mean? Every person that I've ever met that whose opinions I respect all put New Frontier in their top 10 because of how brilliant it takes superheroism, dissects it, and reminds you of its importance even when it struggles to be, you know. And that's part of that's overwhelmingly a massive aspect of this story's overall theme, right? Superheroism isn't easy. If it were easy, everybody would do it. And superheroes fail. They make mistakes. You know, I mean, Hal Jordan was helpless when he, the at the end of World War II, and in that moment he had to do something that he what's the word I'm looking for? He regretted for the rest of his life. You know, so it goes to speak also on the fact that heroes are not perfect, and just because they're not perfect doesn't mean you can demean the acts of their heroism. You know, I mean, it's a consistent thing. There's this great way that Darwyn Cooke, I think, in a way that might even be better than the way Alan Moore did it, and Watchmen integrates these little prose sequences in the form of newspaper articles written by Lois Lane, and one of them was about the death of Our Man, you know, from the JSA, and how the most of the story frames him as a lunatic, and then at the end of the story, and they say everybody at his funeral were people that he saved. You know, it was like 9 murders, 6 rapes, 3 this, 3 that. And it goes to show you that, the public consciousness will frame you in a light that can certainly be less than flattering, but it's never really reflective on who that person is. And there's something very brilliant about that, I think, especially as we're exploring this story with characters that do not fit society's image of what a hero can be. I mean, Martian Manhunter is a big part of this story, and he is anything but human, and yet he seeks to embody the idealisms of humanity. I mean, it's just brilliant. It's a brilliant book, man.
I just want to add that it's that type of brilliance that should be added on by DC, and I want to correct myself because, in fact, in Multiversity, Earth 21 is Darwyn Cooke's universe. Grant Morrison gave Darwyn Cooke his own Earth, so shame on me. I just read. I had to remind myself of that, and it's just more tragic that DC has this rich multiverse of 52 worlds already. It doesn't need an omniverse, but okay, we're gonna get one. That's fine. But it's sad that we've had Earth 21, which is the Darwyn Cooke New Frontier Earth, and we've never gotten any stories from it. It's just really tragic that it's that old expression. We all have diamonds in our own backyard, and yet we spend how many of us go run out to the world looking for what we know, what we don't realize we already have.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's also obviously going to be a little bit of skepticism though, because there are very few people I would ever want to touch, Darwyn Cooke's legacy, in a way that even my favorite comic book, even my favorite comic book of all time. And I mean, before Watchmen, kind of, it tarnished the legacy of that realm. And it's something that I would like to protect Darwyn Cooke's New Frontier at all costs. I mean, like, if DC would just wants to let me write something in this world, let's do that. Like, that's a good way to protect it. Just let me do it. But Some Monkey Dude also brings up another absolutely brilliant tale from Darwyn Cooke that is, I mean, it's transcendent, is Batman Ego. It's one of my favorite Batman stories of all time. It's one of my favorite comic book stories of all time. It is small, it is intimate, but it gets down to the core of the character, his insecurities, and I mean, obviously, his artwork is just so evocative and rings so many bells. I mean, I know it's a New Frontier thing, but boom. I mean, what are your thoughts on something like Batman Ego?
Well, I actually reviewed Batman Ego for I think it was Nerd Scum. I did a 5-minute review of Batman Ego, and I read it again. In actual fact, it's I think Batman Eagle was ahead of its time a little bit because it actually delved more into the mindset of Bruce Wayne and Batman, and should he kill or shouldn't he? Who should Batman be? Who controls Batman, Bruce Wayne, or what's the crisis of conscience? You know, what's the governing morality of Batman? Is it someone who kills or someone who doesn't? Is he a spirit of vengeance? What exactly is he? Is it all about who controls the Batman or Bruce Wayne? I mean, all these psychological questions all weaved into one. Great question. Darwyn Cooke opened that up, those possibilities for not only did he explore that in Batman Ego, but other writers built on that. And we've got lots of great Batman stories that flowed from that. I will say this. I'll just want to quickly add though, that Darwyn Cooke's art in Batman Ego, you could tell he was at the beginning. He was just developing it because it's not as good. It's good. It's okay. But you can see the improvement. If you look at the art, especially how he draws women between New Frontier and Batman Ego, you see a lot of development in his artistic ability. You really do. Batman Ego was good, but New Frontier is him at his best.
Well, I mean, I think visually speaking, there's also something to be said about the evocation of tone. I mean, tone in Batman Ego has to be reflected in the art just as much as it does the writing. So that could have been a conscious artistic choice. You know, I mean, he's doing it in a little bit grittier of a landscape. So, I mean, I would choose to believe, especially with somebody as overwhelmingly conscious as Darwyn Cooke, that maybe those less sort of aesthetically appealing artistic choices were, you know, made to affect the tone of Batman Ego, right? Because
it was though. I have to understand though, Ego was at the beginning of Darwyn Cooke's career, and it really made a name for himself. So, but it was at the beginning, and that's why it's so extraordinary. That's why it's so impressive, because it was at the, you know, this was a guy that was just, you know, you knew right away that this guy knew what he was doing. This guy was good, and again, look, Darwyn Cooke's my favorite is my favorite artist of all time. He's sort of tied with Kurt Swan because I love Kurt Swan on Superman. It was my formative years growing up. But no, I love Darwyn Cooke, and it's just that I know so much. I've got so much of his art that I've seen it develop, and I've seen him at the beginning and how he's changed and evolved on his art. And yeah, it's definitely, you know, very impressive. Very impressive.
100%. And regarding the art, I think Taylor makes an excellent point here, is that a lot of people overlook Dave Stewart's colors. And I'm kind of ashamed that I, you know, would have let that go by the wayside and not mention it. So thank you for bringing it up, because colors are an absolutely massive aspect of the comic book in setting tone. Especially in a story like this that is very, very particular uses of color palette. I mean, you get into, you know, the beginning of the book with the losers, and you get a lot of these oranges and reds and yellows mixed in there, you know, and wartime and conflict is usually painted in those reds and yellows and very harsh colors. But then you get into like the city life, and you have a lot of these sort of more muddled warm colors mixed with, you know, cooler blues and purples. I mean, it's super well done. I think especially noting the fact that Darwyn Cooke is not afraid to spot blacks in his work, so those colors really do pop off the page. You can get a good look there. He's showing you some of this absolutely brilliant art.
Yeah, it's really great stuff. I mean, and just to show off some of the colors too. I mean, just beautiful stuff. I forgot to mention Dr. Fate, Billy Batson. I mean, the Spectre. I mean, all of it. He covered the full gambit here of heroes. Green Arrow, forgot to mention him. Good Lord. And again, all of them had their time in the sun in this story, and just this absolute edition here is also just beautiful.
I think I might have to pull the trigger at some point in the near future on that bad boy, because it is gorgeous for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's
I've just been like trying to teeter-totter on like the omnibus versus the absolute, but I think I'm leaning the absolute. The only thing is that absolutes are sometimes difficult to shelf, but I am overwhelmingly a huge fan of that format.
Yeah, the absolute. I can't believe it came out in. I believe it's came out in 2007. I think it is. I can't believe it's been 16 years since I. It's been 2006. 14 years since I bought this. I can't believe I feel so old, but it's been that long, man. It's just nuts. But yeah. I'm thinking about the last great Darwyn. I think the last Darwyn Cooke. Yeah, the last Darwyn Cooke comic book I bought was it was a Vertigo series, and I can't remember the name of it. In any event, Darwyn Cooke has a great Jonah Hex run as well. Jonah Hex all new Western Jonah Hex all new Western number 34, 35. Some of my favorite Jonah Hex. If I actually have. I should actually bring it. I won't because I'll just get all giddy. But I've got probably a box with about probably 80 Darwyn Cooke covers. And I got all the Darwyn Cooke covers because during the New 52, Darwyn Cooke did all the covers for all the comics. I got every one of them, and it's actually just out of reach. I could probably grab them and show them, but well, I mean, you could Google them too. But I just love them because he did them all long screen. He did them all widescreen on the comic book. So you got a comic book
landscape
like that to see all of it. It's just really great. I mean I love the fact that before he died, no one knew he was going to die so young. But at least DC got some good, he was honored during his lifetime. Just very serendipitously because nobody knew that he would pass so quickly. But
you know what's funnier that you bringing up those covers is that was my first exposure to Darwyn Cooke. That was back when I was pulling maybe a handful of comics every month, and I remember getting the Darwyn Cooke Batman and Detective Comics covers, and I just, man, it just because to me, I had only really prior been exposed to let me reshape this question. Prior to that, I had been exposed to Batman the Animated Series, and the fact that Bruce Timm takes a lot of inspiration from Darwyn Cooke, it obviously those covers just appealed to me, and it brought me back to the Animated Series, only to find out that Darwyn Cooke was more the impetus behind that style, and it's just so brilliant, what he's visually able to do on screen. And what I love about his work is that although it's simple, he just has such a good grasp on character acting. Usually you would think that it would require some greater detail, like a Gary Frank, right, to show you all the little crease lines in someone's face as they're changing their expression, from happy to sad to this to that. But Darwyn Cooke is just able to do it in such a simple way. And it works just as well as somebody who would go in there and stick 100 little lines into a face in order to form an expression. I mean, it's just brilliant what he's able to do visually here. Let's see.
Guess what pops up first?
Oh,
Batman Eagle. And then we got Jonah Hex. He did covers for Jonah Hex, Weird Western Tales, Spider-Man's Tangled Web, Wolverine and Dupe. Wolverine and Dupe. Catwoman and Tweety Bird. He even did a cover of Witchblade.
Wow.
And we got these covers for DC. Classic covers.
Oh, I love that Batman and Robin cover. I love that Batman and Robin cover so much. And I think in the best way of serendipity possible, I think I accidentally bought two of them when they were coming out. It was one of the only books I was buying.
Yeah. But just really great, iconic. Here's one of Superman I love. He's flying out of the Daily Planet. See Superman in the background. He's in probably the closet or wherever the hell that is. Some shit. And then Bruce Wayne, tired after a hard day's work. That's that one.
Oh, those are the movie covers. Yeah.
This is Justice League Dark. And then Grayson he did a cover for Grin. And Titans with them right out of the 1960s. Great one of Aquaman and Mirror. I mean, Supergirl. I mean, I got a bunch here. Supergirl, Wonder Woman. I mean, this is Superman and Wonder Woman
When they were together, yeah.
were together during the New 52. Batgirl, great one of her riding a motorcycle.
Mm. Wow. Notice how he's like the only artist to make that shitty Burnside suit look good.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. But yeah, and then
I love that cover.
yeah, that one's a good one. Yeah, with defusing a bomb. And then the Justice League. This is a classic cover. This is actually on a box. On the box that I put my comics in. That this is actually used for the side of a comic book box. That
a short box.
Yeah, short boxes. Yeah, this is the side of the short box. Is this iconic image? And then he did a slew of GI Zombie covers as well. I could go on. He did the Spirit. He really loved the Spirit. He did an entire series of the Spirit.
I think I have those.
Yeah, Will Eisner's the Spirit, and the last one was the Twilight Children. Was the last series he did before he died. His Vertigo series, the Twilight Children. That was really good. And in his last New Frontier story was in Solo. He actually did write a New Frontier. He wrote another New Frontier story at the end of Solo. And I forget what it was about, but it's in here. But
is it about Slam Bradley?
I think it is. Yeah, something. But yeah, that's yeah, good stuff, man. I love talking about Darwyn Cooke. Puts a smile on my face. And Jimmy Palmiotti was really good friends with him, and he loves. He always every year on Darwyn's birthday, he always tweets some love for his buddy.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I do see those. I mean, man, Darwyn Cooke was just such a force for good in the industry. And I think in so many ways, he was everything that I aspired to be as a comic book creator, just thoughtful of the craft, knowledgeable, loving in what he's doing with these characters and with the medium. I mean, God, he is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Mr. DC Comics says that he believes another reason why the New Frontier is really good is because of the time the story was set in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Really fits DC characters better compared to the modern day, like Marvel. I half agree with you. I agree with the first statement is one of the things, and we talked about this at the beginning of the stream. Was that one beautiful part about the story is how it's set in these very tumultuous times and world in U.S. history that were very defining. And there's something about the legacy of DC characters and how they've changed and the interpretations of those characters changed, particularly in those times that Darwyn Cooke could use to be nothing short of evocative. But what I will say is I don't necessarily think that modern Marvel characters are somehow, I mean, I don't want to. I don't think they fit any better than modern DC characters.
I just want to. I should add, Dark Knight. I don't know if you know this. A lot of people don't know this about Darwyn Cooke, but he got into a huge falling out with Axel Alonso at Marvel Comics because he proposed to Marvel Comics a Marvel action line where he would draw the Marvel characters. He would have done a New Frontier approach with the Marvel characters. He had the entire thing plotted out. He had artistic renditions, everything submitted to Marvel, Axel Alonso, and they never went ahead and did it. And Darwyn Cooke, in a very Google, there's a lot of rumor and innuendo around this, but Darwyn Cooke never denied it, although he later apparently regretted doing it. He actually approached Axel Alonso at a Comic-Con and he threw his drink all over him. And so Darwyn Cooke did have his moments. He did actually, it was going to be a Marvel action line. It was going to be called a Marvel action series. And it was going to be Marvel and Darwyn Cooke's. It was Darwyn Cooke's baby. And they ended up going in a different direction, but utilizing some of what Darwyn Cooke thought were his ideas. Mm-hmm. And he had a huge falling out with Marvel. It's why he left. He did very little Marvel work. The only Marvel work that he really did was Wolverine and Dupe, and he did a couple of things, but then he left. He had a falling out with Axel Alonso. And it's you should Google it sometime. Google Darwyn Cooke, Axel Alonso spilling drinks, and you'll read some interesting tidbits. But just to let you know, though, that Darwyn Cooke in interviews always talked about how important to him it was that that you got to write comic books for kids, but do not insult the children. Write them like you're writing to an adult, but write them for children. Write them so that children can enjoy them too, but also write them because and I think that New Frontier is something that you could give to a 10-year-old, to a 12-year-old, and they can read it, and it's not nudity, it's not openly provocative, there's no exorbitant violence, and it's got good messaging, it's got good morality, it's got good character arcs. And that's something that Darwyn Cooke strongly believed in. He thought comic books were going in the wrong direction. Darwyn Cooke's vision for DC Comics and for comics in general is something that I still believe in to this day, and we all believe in. We've talked about it. He thinks that that comic books were going in the wrong direction before he died, and the New Frontier was the epitome of what he thought the best of comic books could be.
And what I do like about this too, and because I don't want anybody to misconstrue you, is that the comic books were written to be accessible to a younger audience, but they were just as much written for adults as they were kids. I mean, it's not only that he didn't talk down to kids. I mean, he weaved in very, very nuanced writing into this story that I think even, a lot of it's going to fly over the heads of adults. So what I love about it is he's able to really, and it's very, very, very infrequent that somebody can do this, is really make the best of both worlds in his book. I mean, the very human and very sort of existential topics that he handles in these books are adult-like, and there are things in those stories that I think a lot of adults that I meet would not really put a finger on why it would touch them so much. But like you said, it's also enough to where a child can read this and learn, about what it means to be good, right? Like just on a very simple level. How do we value the acts of being good, and what does intent have to do with that, right? And you could go on and on and on. I mean, it is Darwyn Cooke was such a conscious creator. And that's what I love most about his work. And not only the fact that he loves these characters, but he's very conscious of what he's doing with them, both in a literary and in a visually artistic sense.
Yeah, no.
And the thing about New Frontier is, we could probably have at some point over the course of a show 5 or 6 different conversations talking about the New Frontier from different angles. It is that brilliant. It's and me, I've never been one to want to do anything remotely close to something that we've done before. But something like the New Frontier, I feel like a year from now we could have a discussion about basically the accessibility of New Frontier. That's a conversation in and of itself. So with that, I think we could put a good cap on this conversation, just talking about how inspiring Darwyn Cooke was able to remind us that the DC characters are, and he does it in such an insightful and overwhelmingly loving way that does not pull its punches, but is something that anybody can read and that anybody can view and understand it, I think, on a very basic and very primal level. And with that, it just does so much more. It is absolutely brilliant. That's a beauty.
Yeah, that's the cover. That's what the absolute edition. That's what this goes into. It slides in
the slip cover.
Yeah, and yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And
It's gorgeous.
And
it's absolutely gorgeous.
At the end of the day, what Darwyn Cooke brought to me, it's so simple. He brings a smile, because nobody draws a smile on a beautiful woman like Darwyn Cooke. Wonder Woman smiling, Lois Lane smiling, Batgirl smiling, Black Canary smiling. Have Darwyn Cooke draw it, man. That's just, it's absolutely beautiful. He just when I think of DC at its best, I think of a Darwyn Cooke drawn female with a smile on her face. That's what I think of. And if it's got it, whether it's Wonder Woman, Carol Ferris, or Iris Allen, I think of a beautifully drawn woman smiling, and that's the epitome of DC for me. And that's DC at its best, and that's thanks to Darwyn Cooke. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
It is. There's really nothing more to be said about it, man. Darwyn Cooke was an absolutely genius and master of his craft, both as a writer and as an artist. And it is 100% on full display in this story. It is one that many, including I think the two of us would argue, is his magnum opus. And I think it distills a lot of DC's legacy down to its most important points, what these characters stand for, why they're important to us, and why they're everlasting. And I think that is absolutely vital. And, I think Boom and I can both agree that there are very much qualities in that DC is lacking right now. That, boy, I wish and hope that somebody from AT&T sees the dear AT&T in the front of this thumbnail and decides to take a look back at the New Frontier and remind DC Comics why it's so important and why it's so special and why those characters have outlasted, how they've outlasted entire generations and will continue to do so. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this conversation, please do us a solid. Make sure to leave a like on this video and share it around with anybody that you think might be interested in the conversation. It lets us know that these are the types of things that you guys like to talk about. Of course, you can obviously find my cohort down in the description below, link to his channel, subscribe to him. I know that, when he comes back, he'll be bigger, badder, and better than ever. So with that being said, you guys can stick around on the channel and subscribe to me as well. And you can expect to see our ugly mugs every week, just sitting down, talking comics. So with that being said, is there anything you want to say to the people at home, my friend?
I might be throwing out something this weekend. I've been doing this for like 4.5 weeks. I'm taking my time. I got Ecamm Live. I'm working on different thumbnails. I'm experimenting with different ways to live stream. I'm working on my Wi-Fi. I'm really not in a big rush. This is a labor of love for me. I don't do this to make a living at it. I do it because I'm enjoying it. I'm doing it at my own time. And I know, fortunately I got great guys like you, Dark Knight and Professor Bill. And, shutting out Dark Knight's channel here. I encourage everyone to follow him. Also, Professor Bill, and also we've got a weekly thing with Professor Bill. What's our name?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we've formally announced it yet, but I guess.
Well, we did a video, didn't we? Or we haven't done a video yet.
We haven't posted it yet. So just to let you guys know,
did I just ruin it? Did I spoil it?
Maybe a little bit. Just to let you guys know, we have been filming a little bit of a backlog of episodes of a podcast with Professor Bill from Comic Book University that you've seen on the channel multiple times, especially, a handful of times more recently. So they're going to be very topical discussions regarding these characters and storylines that we love, that I think will approach them in very hard-hitting ways and in much more digestible ways. So if you guys are interested, please make sure you stick around, subscribe to our channels, because we'll definitely be posting about them so that you guys can get to it. I'm sure that we'll be announcing it in a larger capacity once we have a couple of episodes ready to go. So that we can make sure to stay consistent. But, just give you guys a little sizzle, a little tease. We are doing something, and it's shaping up to be something great. So stick around, and we will see you guys next week for another episode of Let's Talk Comics. Take care.